I'm so close to rebuilding the $6 million Bugatti Chiron Sport. We still have no idea what it's going to look like. It's like a $700,000 body kit. No one's ever done it before, and this is going to be the perfect opportunity to do it on this type of car, being that we can't buy original body panels.
A $6 million Bugatti Chiron crashed in Miami. Bugatti's own technician looked at it and called it a total loss, then locked the car's VIN so no dealership on earth would sell it a single part. That should have ended the story. Instead, one British YouTuber looked at a car the manufacturer had already given up on and refused to accept the verdict. Mad Armstrong hand-built radiators, borrowed airbags from an Audi.
Audi A3 compared to a Bugatti is completely different, but why use the same airbag if it wasn't safe? The part number would be completely different, as we found on the knee airbags.
And rebuilt an engine Bugatti never wanted running again. Even Bugatti's own chief executive got involved. Did Bugatti abandon this car too soon, or was walking away the right call? Let's break down exactly how this played out. The $6 million crash. The Bugatti Chiron Sport is not a common car by any definition of the word. Only 60 were ever built, each one a track-focused variant of the standard Chiron, stripped and sharpened for cornering rather than outright top speed. Owned by Miami-based content creator Alex Gonzalez, this particular example carried a pre-crash value near $6 million, the kind of number that turns a car into a statement rather than a possession. Then, in the final months of 2025, it crashed. The front end absorbed the worst of it. Airbags deployed across the cabin, carbon fiber bodywork cracked along the nose, headlights destroyed, and the frame itself twisted out of alignment. This was not cosmetic damage that a body shop could quietly buff out over a weekend. A Bugatti technician flew directly from France to inspect the wreckage in person, because a car built to this level of precision does not get evaluated over a phone call and a handful of photographs. Is there any other consumer product on Earth that requires a factory representative to cross an ocean just to assess a wrecked example of it? The Sport variant itself makes that response almost inevitable. Unlike the standard Chiron, built to chase raw top speed above all else, the Sport was engineered specifically for cornering. Stiffer suspension, a shorter final drive ratio, and aerodynamic tweaks that sacrifice a measure of outright velocity in exchange for genuine handling precision on a circuit. That specialization is exactly what makes only 60 of them existing in the entire world feel less like a marketing figure and more like a genuine scarcity problem for anyone hoping to source a replacement panel. After a careful inspection, the verdict came back blunt and final: total loss. Repair estimates for parts alone came in near $1,700,000, a figure that treats a car repair less like an invoice and more like a small business acquisition. The damage list read like a catalog of everything expensive on a modern hypercar. The hood, the front wings, the headlights, and the horseshoe grille that has defined Bugatti's identity since long before the Chiron existed. All of it destroyed or unusable in a single impact. For most owners, that number alone would have ended the conversation. Insurance would settle. The wreck would move to auction, and the story would end exactly where thousands of other total loss supercars end every year. Quietly, anonymously, forgotten in a storage yard with a salvage title and no future. But this Chiron Sport was about to become the exception, and the reason had almost nothing to do with money at all. Gonzalez himself is not a passive collector removed from the online car world. As a content creator in his own right, he understood exactly how visible this crash and its aftermath would become the moment word got out.
I've been a follower of Bugatti. I've been a brand representative of Bugatti for a very long time. This is a bit split up over here. This is probably the most damaged area right here.
And that visibility would end up shaping every decision made about the car from that point forward. Insurance settlements on cars this specialized rarely move quickly. Adjusters accustomed to valuing sedans and pickup trucks suddenly found themselves negotiating over a vehicle with only 59 surviving siblings worldwide, no meaningful resale comparables, and a manufacturer unwilling to offer a straightforward repair path that might have simplified the entire claims process. That friction between an insurance system built for ordinary vehicles and a hypercar built in numbers small enough to count on two hands created exactly the kind of bureaucratic tangle that pushes a car towards salvage rather than repair, even before Bugatti's own decisions entered the picture. News of the crash spread through car social media within hours, not days, turning what might have quietly stayed a private insurance matter into a story the entire hypercar community was watching unfold in close to real time, long before anyone knew whether the car would ever run again. The VIN that locked everything. A salvage title is usually where a supercar's public story ends. The Chiron received exactly that designation and was routed toward a Copart salvage auction, the same channel used to liquidate wrecked sedans and flooded pickup trucks, now processing a machine that had cost more than most houses. Copart handles millions of vehicles a year, the overwhelming majority of them ordinary cars, destined for parts recycling or export. And a listing algorithm built for that volume has no real mechanism for recognizing that one particular chassis number belongs to one of only 60 examples on the planet. That mismatch between mass-market salvage infrastructure and genuine automotive rarity is exactly the gap Bugatti's VIN lock was designed to widen rather than close. But Bugatti did something far more aggressive than simply walking away from the repair. The manufacturer locked the car's VIN in its parts system, a move that meant no authorized Bugatti dealership anywhere in the world would sell so much as a single bolt for this specific chassis. That decision did not just make the repair difficult. It was designed to make an independent rebuild functionally impossible, steering the car toward exactly one remaining option: a full factory restoration back in Molsheim, France, priced high enough to rival buying an entirely different Chiron outright. Why would a manufacturer go out of its way to block a customer from fixing a car it had already declared worthless on paper? The practice is not unique to Bugatti, but it is rarely applied this aggressively. Manufacturers of ultra-high-performance vehicles routinely restrict parts access on salvage-titled cars, arguing that independent repairs on machines capable of surpassing 250 miles per hour create liability risks the factory cannot control or verify. A locked VIN removes that risk entirely from Bugatti's perspective. If the car never legally returns to the road through official channels, it can never be traced back to a repair the manufacturer did not personally inspect and approve. Other hypercar makers have followed similar logic in the past, restricting parts on wrecked or salvage-titled examples specifically to prevent exactly the kind of independent, camera-documented rebuild Armstrong was about to attempt. Proof that Bugatti was not improvising a new policy so much as applying an existing playbook with unusual force to an unusually visible car. That visibility cuts both ways, though. A blacklist enforced quietly against an anonymous salvage buyer draws no attention at all. A blacklist enforced against a car being rebuilt on camera, in front of an audience already invested in the outcome, turns a private business decision into a public referendum on whether the policy itself is fair. Bugatti did eventually offer an alternative, a revised repair quote near $600,000, a fraction of the original estimate. Gonzalez turned it down. The reasoning behind that decision was never fully explained on camera, but the practical outcome was unmistakable. Even a discounted factory offer still left the car firmly under Bugatti's terms, with the manufacturer controlling both the timeline and the final say over what counted as an acceptable repair. Instead, Gonzalez bought the wrecked Chiron.
I'm here in my second current Bugatti Chiron Pure Sports. I've had the car ready for about 3 weeks, and I decided to finally do the video of the car live.
Back out of the salvage auction himself, paying close to $1,900,000 to reclaim a car Bugatti had already written off twice over. First as a total loss, and then as something not worth fixing on Bugatti's own revised terms. That decision put the Chiron in an unusual position: legally owned, physically wrecked, and functionally locked out of the only parts network built to bring it back to life. Would most owners really spend nearly $2 million just to reclaim the right to attempt an impossible repair themselves? It needed someone willing to treat a factory blacklist as a starting point, rather than a dead end. And that is precisely the reputation Matt Armstrong had spent years building. Rebuilding the impossible. Matt Armstrong did not arrive at hypercar rebuilds by accident. His career began with a wrecked Audi TT, a project that established the format he has built his entire channel around: buying damaged cars nobody else wanted, and documenting every step of bringing them back to working condition. A damaged Bentley Continental GT, restored during the height of the pandemic, grew his audience into something far larger than a niche mechanical channel. But a VIN-locked Chiron Pure Sport was a different category of challenge entirely, because this time, the manufacturer itself was actively working against the rebuild rather than simply being absent from it. Rebuilding a Bentley or an Audi means dealing with a supply chain that, while occasionally slow, still fundamentally wants to sell you parts.
With Bugatti refusing to sell us parts, everything we were going to have to replace on this car was going to have to be made.
Rebuilding a car whose own manufacturer has actively locked its identity out of that supply chain meant treating every single component as a research problem before it could ever become an installation problem. With official parts completely unavailable, the team turned to fabrication instead of ordering from a catalog. A specialist known simply as Bob, from a shop called the Machine Shop, built replacement radiators entirely from scratch, then spent 60 hours hand-building a custom front crash bar with no factory part to reference or copy. Without the ability to three-dimensional scan the original component, the replacement still needed to bolt cleanly onto the chassis legs, mounting points and threads included, built purely from careful measurement and experience. Could a hand-fabricated part really match the precision of something Bugatti spent years engineering in a controlled facility? The improvisation did not stop at radiators. Airbags for the cabin were sourced from an ordinary Audi A3, adapted to fit a car worth roughly 100 times as much as the donor vehicle they came from. When a coolant overflow pipe turned up pinched and unusable, the fix was not a Bugatti replacement part. It was a section of rigid brake hose, cut and fitted by hand. Some of the smallest details told the biggest story about what a hand rebuild actually requires. The accelerator pedal, the single component translating a driver's right foot into more than 1,200 horsepower, turned out on inspection to be little more than molded plastic, rather than the machined billet aluminum most owners would assume sits inside a multi-million-dollar hypercar. A small, almost funny reminder that even Bugatti's own engineering occasionally prioritizes cost and weight over the image people project onto these machines. Even a specialist shop called Valvetronic contributed, fabricating a custom exhaust system from scratch once it became clear no factory unit would ever arrive. Separating the transmission from the engine block became its own multi-day operation, requiring the team to work through a bespoke quad-turbo W16 architecture.
W16 Bugatti engine. That's one pretty powerful starter motor. You can see here the part numbers are exactly the same and they're identical parts.
With no factory service manual, willing to walk them through the specific complications of a crash-damaged example. Piece by piece, a car that Bugatti had functionally erased from its own parts network was being rebuilt using components borrowed, adapted, and hand-built from an entirely different universe of manufacturers. A Frankenstein logic that should not have worked on a car this complex, and yet kept moving forward one solved problem at a time. None of these fixes were permanent placeholders waiting to be swapped for genuine Bugatti components later, either. With the VIN still locked, every hand-built radiator and every borrowed airbag was, functionally, the permanent solution, expected to perform exactly as well as the factory part it replaced for as long as the car stayed on the road. That expectation raised the stakes on every single fabrication decision, because a mistake in a hand-built radiator is not a minor inconvenience on a car producing this much heat under sustained load. It is a potential engine failure waiting for the wrong afternoon to happen. Mate Rimac steps in. Word of an independent Chiron rebuild does not stay quiet for long in the hypercar world, and this one eventually reached the one person with the authority to end it entirely. Mate Rimac, the chief executive behind Bugatti Rimac, had reportedly been following the project's progress as it unfolded publicly online, watching a car his own company had declared beyond saving slowly come back together in someone else's workshop. His response was not simple validation. Rimac raised specific, technical safety concerns rather than a generic corporate objection. The gearbox housing had shattered in the crash, and the monocoque itself, the structural carbon fiber tub the entire car is built around, had absorbed real damage. In a machine capable of speeds most public roads were never designed to handle, those are not cosmetic worries. A monocoque is not a component that can be patched or reinforced the way a damaged steel frame might be. It is a single, molded carbon fiber structure that the entire car's crash safety depends on. Engineered so that in a genuine high-speed impact, the tub itself absorbs and redirects force away from the cabin. Damage to that structure is not always visible to the eye, and a hairline fracture invisible under normal inspection can behave completely differently the next time the car experiences serious stress. That is precisely why Rimac's warning carried more weight than a routine corporate disclaimer. He was not describing a hypothetical risk. He was describing the specific failure mode that monocoque construction exists to prevent in the first place. Should a manufacturer really stay silent while an independent team rebuilds a car it has already deemed structurally compromised? Rimac's perspective on this carries more technical weight than a typical corporate executive's would. Before Bugatti Rimac existed as a merged company, Rimac built his reputation as an engineer first, founding an electric hypercar company from scratch, and developing the kind of hands-on chassis and safety expertise that most automotive CEOs never personally acquire. That background makes his concerns harder to dismiss as simple corporate liability posturing. When Rimac says a monocoque has absorbed structural damage, he is speaking with direct engineering credibility, not just a legal department's talking points. Rimac's concerns were not about protecting Bugatti's parts business. They were about what happens if a car with hidden structural damage is driven hard by someone who trusts it completely. Rather than escalating the blacklist further, Bugatti's leadership eventually chose a different path. The company began easing its position, allowing elements of the parts freeze to loosen, even without fully reversing course. And Rimac's public comments shifted from warning toward cautious support for a project he could no longer simply ignore. What changes a manufacturer's mind after it has already declared a car unfixable in public? Sustained, transparent progress documented on camera made it considerably harder for Bugatti to maintain that a rebuild was reckless or amateur once the actual engineering being performed became visible to millions of viewers. That shift mattered enormously, because a rebuild built entirely on improvisation is a very different story than one that eventually earns even partial acknowledgement from the manufacturer that tried to stop it from happening in the first place. It also reframed the entire narrative around the project, no longer simply a YouTuber defying a corporation for content, but something closer to an ongoing, cautious dialogue between an independent workshop and the very engineers who understood better than anyone else exactly what could go wrong. Few manufacturers ever reached that point with a project they initially tried to block entirely, and fewer still do it this publicly, with a chief executive's own name attached to comments millions of people would eventually see and quote back to the company for months afterward. The engine came back to life. Every fabricated part, every borrowed component, every hand-built workaround was built toward a single moment that either justified the entire project or exposed it as an expensive, elaborate failure. Before the quad-turbo W16 engine could even attempt to run, the homemade radiator system had to prove it could hold pressure, feeding a cooling system that swallows more than 10 gallons of coolant just to keep an engine this powerful from destroying itself under load. The first attempt failed. The front radiator had likely been damaged in transit, forcing the team back to the fabrication bench before they could even think about starting the engine for the first time. A car in this complex does not forgive a rushed shortcut at the cooling stage, overheating a W16 running this much boost even once, and months of hand-built work could turn into scrap metal in under a minute. Once the replacement finally held, the front and rear halves of the Chiron, separated for months during the rebuild, were reunited and bolted back together as a complete chassis for the first time since the crash. Would a car assembled from improvised parts and donor components even start, let alone run cleanly? It did both. The quad-turbo W16 fired up.
I'm looking at the Bugatti's W16 engine. Okay, this one has 8 liters, 16 cylinders, quad turbos.
And by every account from the workshop that day, it sounded exactly like a Bugatti is supposed to sound. Savage, immediate, utterly unapologetic about the 1,200-plus horsepower sitting behind the cabin. For a few seconds, nobody in that workshop said anything at all, the sound alone doing more to confirm months of work than any spreadsheet or torque spec ever could. The car's first real test drive followed shortly after, smooth enough and strong enough under acceleration that the sensation reportedly overwhelmed the very team that had spent months building toward that exact moment, describing the feeling of the car surging forward as something closer to disbelief than celebration. Months of hand-fabricated radiators, borrowed airbags, and improvised brake hose plumbing had all been building toward roughly 10 seconds of acceleration that either validated every decision made along the way or exposed the entire project as an expensive illusion. It validated it completely. The project was not finished. A sensor issue later forced the team to find a creative access workaround, rather than pulling the engine a second time, cutting a small, carefully measured opening that reached the faulty component without repeating days of disassembly. The first mistake had already cost them. That single decision, made under pressure after already investing months into the build, nearly defined whether the entire project survived its own momentum or collapsed under one avoidable error. Does a project this ambitious ever really finish, or does it just keep surviving one crisis at a time? Every rebuild this complicated seems to reach a point where the hardest part is no longer the engineering itself, but simply refusing to quit after the 10th setback in a row. Bugatti's broader relationship with the build remains complicated even now. Neither a full endorsement nor active opposition, something closer to a manufacturer watching from a careful distance, as a car it once declared dead continues proving otherwise. But the central question Bugatti's abandonment seemed to answer in advance had already been answered differently. by a workshop the manufacturer never authorized and a team it never approved. Whatever happens to this particular Chiron Pur Sport from here, the precedent it set is already impossible to undo. A car declared dead on paper, running again on hand-built parts and borrowed components, its exhaust note echoing through a workshop Bugatti never wanted involved in its story at all. Every future owner who finds a wrecked hypercar locked out of its own parts network now has a documented example, proving the blacklist is not automatically the end of the road, even if it remains, by design, one of the hardest roads back that the industry currently offers. So who really decided this car's fate? Bugatti called it a total loss, locked its VIN, and walked away completely. Matt Armstrong refused that verdict. Hand-building radiators, borrowing airbags from an Audi, and rebuilding an engine Bugatti swore would never run again. Even Mate Rimac, watching from the top of the company that had abandoned this car, couldn't stay silent once the progress became impossible to ignore. A $6 million hypercar declared dead on paper is now running on parts nobody at Bugatti approved. Was walking away ever really the right call? Drop your verdict below. Hit like if this rebuild earned it, and subscribe for the next impossible project.